One of the first who came was Marjorie Lawrence, the Australian singer, whom none of us had ever heard. She hadn't sung here before. And she was the one, you know, who was struck down with polio at the very height of her career. She told us once how it happened. She said, I was in, I think, Mexico City, wasn't she? Yes. And she just got married. And she was rehearsing. She was doing the, I think it was, yes, it must have been the Valkyra Brunhilde. And she said, I knew that I had a headache and I felt rather strange, but she said, I let off the ho-yo-to-ho and ran down to the central stage and fell at Wotan's feet, and she said, I never got up. She said, that was drama for you, if you like. But she absolutely, she was so courageous about it. And she and her husband came. She used to sing, sometimes from a wheelchair. Occasionally she sang with a brace here, and so it held her. But the thing was that she was determined to come and sing. And so we were very much taken with the idea. We didn't know her. But we thought, oh, well, let's have the first of the gallery parties that we sometimes did, that we've had since the war. And we wrote to her and we said that there would be people who, you know, had no social standing or anything like that, but were great enthusiasts. And if she felt she would like to come and see us, we would get as many as we could into the flat. And she wrote back and she said, or perhaps her husband wrote back and said, we have many, many invitations, but we feel that this is one we would like to accept. We will be there. Well, then, of course, came how the hell we were going to feed them, because we were on rations then. So I hastily wrote to a friend of mine in Northumberland and said, I know those of you who read the book know this story, but I love it. And said, could you rustle up a chicken or something like that for us? And she wrote back and said, I'll do better. I will bring you a coquette salmon. Now, as coquette salmon is the best salmon in the world. And so we waited. She said, I'll cook it up, then I'll bring it down. Well, when she came, she explained that it was a terrible drama because that day, in this strange local expression, the salmon wouldn't swim. In other words, they didn't come in. And so she said, there they were. She said, lots of us were on the beach. It's just where the river runs into the sea there. And she said, there were lots of people after it. And then she said, in came an absolute king of salmon. And everybody wanted it. She said, I clasped it to my bosom, and I stood there and I told them the story of Marjorie Lawrence and why we wanted the salmon. And they said, take it. And so she cooked the salmon and she brought it down, and Marjorie said it was the best salmon they'd ever tasted. They were terribly human, she and her husband. And the other lovely story, which I must tell you about them, was that they were going on to Berlin. Now, we at that time were trying terribly hard to get some money to an old lady in Berlin who really was starving. We didn't know her awfully well. She was the old girlfriend of somebody we got out. And we were saying, you know, how difficult. You weren't allowed to send money. You couldn't send it, although it was peacetime. And Marjorie said, can't we take it? So I said, would you? She said, of course. She turned around and said, darling, you'll find the place, won't you? He said, of course. And I mean, these two who were really there, you know, on this sort of star tour, they took the money and they found the old lady and they got it to her. You know, these are the things that really so warm your heart. And that, I mean, they talk so much about a caring society. They don't know what a caring society is. It's one of those grasping and greedy and credulous societies this country's ever known. But this was, they care. Now, Marjorie, I would very much like her to sing an air from Reyer's Sigurd. It gives a wonderful idea of the colour of the voice. It's not the greatest music. I mean, it didn't rival Wagner, but it was really, I feel it suited her voice and everything. It's quite a rare record, really. Anyway, here she is. Here's dear Marjorie, who really had a warm heart. it was a very Australian voice, you know. It was a wonderful, fresh ring to it. And she said once, "I'm sorry you didn't see him on the stage." She said, "I don't make great claims to my singing, but she said I was a very good actress." And actually, Fürstner, you know, the publisher of Strauss, I remember once we were speaking of a much admired Salome. I said, "That's a great Salome, isn't it, Mr. Fürstner?" "No," he said, "she's a very good Salome." So I said, "Well, who would you call a great Salome?" He said, "Your Marjorie Lawrence was a great Salome when I had her there in France." It was interesting, the things that were said about her. Now, I'm sure you didn't expect a programme without My Darling Rose upon Sale, but I've done her so often for you that I didn't put her in. But I thought I would, for one of my special friends here, put in Pinzer, who is, of course, the greatest bass we ever heard, and one of the greatest male singers of all. And he had this terrific personality and was tremendously friendly, adored the gallery queue. We all adored him, of course, all in love with Pinzer in my young days. And he was Eva has her stories about him too. You know, Francis Robinson, once the assistant manager of the Met, he once said the most remarkable thing about Pinzer, which I think summed him up. He said, "He's had a sort of sexual radiance which I never saw surpassed in any person." And it was absolutely true. It was something that sort of shone from him, and yet he was absolutely so easy to talk. Of course, he was a rogue, but I mean, he was a darling rogue, and he really enjoyed left us all in the gallery, and he had this tremendous energy. He hadn't learnt music. He practically sang by ear. Not entirely so, like Stabile, but he had this, he always said he was very sorry he'd never had a musical training, but of course Toscanini picked him out very early on. I'd forgotten that, and then of course he came to the Met, and he had this tremendous career at the Met, and fell in with Bruno Walter, who really gave him his Mozart training. That was when he came to Salzburg in 1934 as Don Giovanni. And of course, I'm sure most of you know that wonderful story of how when Bruno Walter was going to conduct Don Giovanni in Salzburg, and he said, "But only if I can find someone who can sing the part, act the part, look the part, and be the part," which is asking a lot, of course. And anyway, he was in New York, and he heard that Pinzer did the role. And he wrote to him. I tell you, they didn't phone to each other. We wrote to each other then. And he wrote to him and said, would he come and see him? And so Pinzer went and called at the flat of the Walters. And their maid was out. But they had a very homely, middle-aged Hungarian cook. And she opened the door to him. And she came into Bruno Walter and she said, "Oh, sir, there's such a lovely man outside." He said, "I knew I'd found my Don Giovanni." Which was true. Now, of course, we always think of him as a great operatic artist. He was. But I thought that in the later years, of course, he did a lot of concerts. And then, as you all know, he went into Broadway and in South Pacific, for good or ill. And, of course, he changed the domestic life of New York, because all the elderly husbands said, well, if he could do it, why not they? And he was if he came into a restaurant, people stood up and cheered. It really was great fun knowing Pinzer in those days. And but we're going to play two songs. One is an old Italian song, Lungi del Caro Ben, which I always think gives the sound of Pinzer's voice almost better than anything else. I played it recently at a record society, and the man who played the records came to me afterwards and said, if I weren't a very honest person, that wouldn't go back to you. But anyway, we'll play this, and then we'll play one of these inconsiderable ballads that Pinzer could do like no one else. I believe it's rather a favourite of yours, Into the Night. I love your story about that, the two of you. Yes. Here he is, a little bit. wonder we loved him. And then we're going to have him sing this. It is an inconsiderable ballad, this one that's coming, but you'll see what we meant. He was one of the loveliest things about Pinzer was he was marvellous with children. He really was. And I know Sweden remembers this too. In the queue, we had a little boy who used to queue with his mother during the day, and his name was George. And George, who was 3, he took great interest in the various singers, and he used to insist on including Geely and Pinzer in his prayers every night. I know Pinzer needed them, I don't know whether Geely did. Well, when we used to queue during the day, you know, God knows how we ever got to the office or did anything worth it. And George said that when Mr. Pinzer came, he was going to say hello. Well, naturally, I need hardly tell you that when Mr. Pinzer turned the corner, George immediately became shy. And so there we all were. Come on, George, come on. You know what you're going to say. Don't you? Oh, George, I remember so well. I see him now. Pinzer came up and said, leave him alone. And he picked him up and took him up to the end of the road and talked to him. And by the time he brought him back to his mum, they were firm friends. It was absolutely extraordinary to see him handled like that. There was this side to him. You had to love him. You couldn't help it. Here he is into the night. Which is rather late in his career.
Silently into the night I go, into the fragrant night I know not where. The path is strange, my weary steps are slow. I do not find you there. I turn my gaze on the morning sun, as from the east he comes through the dark and the dew. The flowers lift their night I go, into the starry night of heavenly blue. What matters when the road may lead, if I but come again at last to you.
Of course, that really is masterly singing. Yes, he really deserves it. It was absolutely a matchless organ, superbly used. And we were, like I say, very, very lucky to. And when he was, not long before he died, and he was singing on Broadway. And I remember when we went round backstage, he said, "There are 2 roles I would like to sing once again." Interesting what they were. He said one was Boris and the other was Figaro. He was marvellous in both, of course, but evidently those were the ones that he didn't really like doing Don Giovanni. It was too much his real self and it made him uncomfortable. It was awfully funny, on days of performance, Pinzer would go to church. And Redberg said, "Well, don't be so silly." She said, "Either go to church properly, anyway, but don't go and cadge for some assistance on the day of a performance." But Pinzer thought he'd make sure, They were killing together. They really were so terribly funny together. And though she should never have really been with him, she was a very intelligent woman and very well read and everything. But I think if he loved anybody, he loved her. But of course, he just couldn't be faithful to anyone. But he had interesting, Redberg had an irresistible appeal to the wrong sort of man. She was very respectable, but they all ran after her because she was this lovely, Saxon-looking lady. It was an extraordinary business. And one year when they were at the Garden, he said, "Here you are, you do my fan mail for me." And so I did. I must tell you, it was very odd fan mail. But he said you could throw away those. He handed some to me. Naturally, I read them before I threw them away. And there was a lovely letter, which I've lost. It's somewhere in the attic, from Lucrezia Borri to him, thanking him for raising the money for the farewell gift to her at the Met. And it's so interesting. She says, "Dear Pinzer," she didn't call him Ezio. She behaved as though he was a lackey, and Prince didn't care to hoot, of course, but she was very superior. Now, at the end, we're going right back to the date when I started, 1924, because that was the first time that Louise and I went to Covent Garden. And our first performance together was Rigoletto, and the tenor was Picavert. And we knew nothing about it, and they didn't give you the story in those days. I remember saying to some people, somebody sitting beside us, of this performance of Rigoletto, "Does it end happily?" And the answer was, "Well, no, I don't think it does," which I feel was the operatic understatement of all time. But the tenor was Picavert. And we'd never heard a great tenor before, and I thought, this is how tenors are, And I played the other day a record of Picavert singing Pour un baiser of Tosti, and I thought, gosh, no wonder you were thrilled. It was one of the finest tenors we heard, and we thought, oh yes, this is how tenors are. It was many years before we heard another one like it, but here he is. we were lost. And so that's how it all started. Now, I must tell you, I've absolutely loved this evening, going down memory lane. I do hope you have enjoyed it too. And one of the most thrilling things is that we should have had in the audience one of the greatest artists we ever heard in darling Dame Eva Turner.
Ladies
I do hope you have enjoyed it too. And one of the most thrilling things is that we should have had in the audience one of the greatest artists we ever heard in darling Dame Eva Turner.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are two categories of giving thanks which really are to be avoided if possible. One is when you've listened to a dull programme and you have to think up words to say and you find it virtually impossible. The other category is after a programme by Ida Cook, because whoever gives the vote of thanks will find that he's simply an anticlimax. But in the 1950s, when I was starting collecting records, I read Desmond Shaw Taylor in the Gramophone referring to the 1920s and 1930s as being the era of the Cook sisters. And I didn't know then what that meant, because I had a vague idea, but not really. Now I know. But this, I'm afraid, is going to be a rather short vote of thanks, but it's going to be a heartfelt one. Because to me, and I think to many people here, it's not a lost world that you've brought before us, it's a world that never was. Because we didn't know them. But we do know them, because Ida has brought them alive before us. So although I and you, many of you, didn't see Hempel and Rhett and De Luca, we have seen them, because we've seen them through the pictures that Ida paints for them. The singers whom she loves, the singers who are her singers. And we get a picture not only of the name on a record label, the voice on a record, but these singers as people. And she and Louise travelled literally thousands of miles to hear these people. Some of us think it's a bit too far to go up the road to hear somebody. Unfortunately, we do. But it's splendid. And when the time machine, H.G. Wells' time machine, is finally made, may I come back with you to hear Pinzer and Rhett. And may I, perhaps sometimes, the National Trust will arrange a guided tour through your attic. Thank you very much.
Tell you something, I think we hear them all afterwards. I've got my casts ready now. Thank you, John, dear.